Hello and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez, and we are looking forward to having a great conversation with you today. Give us a call. We're here live until 4 p.m. Pacific Time. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. 888-564-6173. And if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, we've got the number there. There on the bottom of your screen so that you can call us, 888-564-6173. You can also send us your questions on Facebook Messenger or by filling out the form on the Pastor's Perspective page of our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com. But we sure would love to chat with you. So give us a call, 888-564-6173. And answering your questions today, we've got Brian Brodersen, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. He joins me here in the studio. On the Bobby Cam, we've got Bobby Conway from Charlotte, North Carolina. He's the pastor at Image Church in Charlotte. And on Tony TV, it's Tony Clark from Calvary Chapel, Newport News in Virginia. And Tony, belated happy birthday to you, sir.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And when was this birthday?
3/16. Isn't that cool?
3/16.
That's like the coolest date.
Tony 3/16.
Yes, indeed.
Got to go with that.
It's got to be a epic verse.
Yes, indeed.
That's referring to. 3/16. So, okay. So, what? You're not the big 6-0 yet?
No.
57?
Knocking on the door, though.
Knocking on the door. What, 59?
No. 8.
58. Okay.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, you're the only one that I allowed to say my age out in public. So,
yeah. Well, you're still a youngster in my book, you know.
And that's why I never tell people my age, because that remark always follows.
Yes.
So you're not the guy who's going to walk into Denny's and demand your senior discount or anything like that. You're just like, yeah, that's good. That's good. I know someone who can't wait to turn 55 because he'll go ask for his... I'm like, really? No. I don't know. That's just weird to me. But
wow, man. I missed that one. I missed the Denny's discount, you know. I don't know.
They owe you.
I think it's been 55 years since I went to Denny's. So,
yeah, right? Yeah.
All right, 888-564-6173 is the number to call, 888-564-6173. And a quick shout out to the Geek Squad, who is here at the studio right now repairing our refrigerator. Thank you so much, Geek Squad. I didn't get his name, but thank you so much for what you do.
Our refrigerator, of all things.
Yes, wow. Yes. It was, it's on the brink, but it was still under warranty, apparently.
Yeah, you know, you got to get the warranty these days because the old fridges don't last like they used to.
Mm-mm.
You know,
Mm-mm.
The new fridges don't last like the old ones used to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But thank you. There he is. Thank you, sir. We appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Look at that.
All right, 888-564-6173 is the number to call. Now, before we get to the questions that are on the phone, let's take one that was sent in online using the form on our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com. Vanjie wrote in. She asks, how do you worship the Lord? I can't sing or dance. I want to deep dive in my relationship with God, and I come out blank when it comes to worshiping. What would you suggest? Vanjie, I guess, sings out of key, has 2 left feet. So what should she do, Pastor Brian?
You know, there is no requirement for singing on key necessarily when you're singing to God because he doesn't care because God looks at your heart. That's what matters. And, you know, if you can't dance, that's okay too. You can just jump around and be excited. But we have to be a little more
Wasn't that a song in the
specific?
90s? Jump around. Sorry, go ahead. What?
When worship, sometimes and I think in our time for sure, we have equated worship with singing. And that we do it. All of us do it. Okay, now we're going to have a time of worship, which means we're going to have a time of singing. But in the Bible, worship and singing are not necessarily connected. They are maybe twice. Then there's something in the Bible called praise, which would be more consistently singing, or just a kind of a rejoicing verbally. But worship is it's the dedication of your life. So Paul says, in writing to the church in Rome, he says, present your bodies a living sacrifice, which is your spiritual act of worship. So this is how we worship the Lord, by giving ourselves to the Lord. So just as you've dedicated your life to Him, that's worship. Your life now is the worship of God. And as you walk in obedience to Him, as you seek to do His will, you're actually worshiping the Lord there. Now, to express verbally your thanks and your praise, that's wonderful too. But again, you don't have to know how to sing to do that. You can just say, thank you, God. I know people who they just can't sing on key to save their life. It's just not even possible. I don't even think they know that there's such a thing as being on or off key. But it doesn't stop them.
I think my wife's in that department.
It doesn't stop them. They sing at the top of their lungs, and it's okay because, your audience is the Lord. So don't get hung up on that.
Yeah. Tony Clark.
Yeah, what Pastor Brian said, he took the scripture right out of my mouth as far as Romans 12:1. It is, a reasonable service, or as it's translated from the Greek, our act of worship. And worship is a lifestyle. Jesus said, though, that the Father is seeking such to worship Him in spirit and in truth in John 4:24. And then in Psalm 96, verse 9, it talks about how we should worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. And so we're getting closer and closer to what it means to worship the Lord. Yes, in our modern day American way of doing things, worship is, the 30 minutes we do before the sermon. But worship, just like Pastor Brian said, is a lifestyle.
So, Bobby, have you ever said that to Heather?
Or is she finding out for the first time right now on this podcast?
I hope she's not listening, and all of a sudden she thinks, "Oh no, Bobby thinks I can't sing."
Oh, she can't sing to save her life. I roast her. It's like, listen, I know that the Lord would be pleased with the sound of her voice, but please don't do that too loud in church, right?
Poor Heather.
There is poor Heather. Well, we roast each other about this. I'm not much better myself, to be honest with you. And it's crazy because our daughter is just a scary, gifted worship leader. Yep. But I will say that as for my experience in church, I'm laughing because there was this one guy, he would just be belting out, and I would just think, my goodness, like, he's killing it right now. Like I'm glad he feels like this is unto the Lord, but everybody else around, I think that we were just distracted. So I would say it is a gift to the body if you know how to turn the volume down when you're singing, if you vocally will become a distraction, and then save your big moments, the going big for God in the quiet room.
Yeah.
That's that. But
I would agree. I would agree with that.
Yeah. Because sometimes I think people go, it's unto the Lord. I'm like, well, that's great, but I can't focus. So I know sometimes people think that's cruel, but I'm thankful. I know I can't sing well, so I just make sure I keep it at a reasonable volume. But when it comes to worship, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as unto the Lord, not for men. And so taking just that whole lifestyle, worship is an act of living. I think about the story of Cain and Abel. It's just that short story. And, we know Cain was so upset with it his brother's offering, that he offed him as a result. And it uses, this language where you're like, well, what's the difference? Like, why was God so worked up? In Hebrew, the word for offering there is minha. And it says that Cain brought his minha and Abel brought his minha, yet the Lord was displeased with Cain's minha, but he was pleased with Abel's minha. And the thing that is the key indicator there is that Abel brought his first fatty portions. And so in bringing his fatty portions, he brought the best to God, whereas Cain brought his leftovers. And God doesn't want our leftovers in worship. He wants our best. He wants all of us. And so even Jesus was the minha of God. He was God's perfect sacrifice, offering himself up for us. And so I do think that there's something for us just to make sure that, I think, where are we just giving our leftovers to God? If all conditions are right, maybe I'll go to church. Or, if my budget's met, then I'll start giving and start tithing. If I have a little extra time in my schedule, then I'll serve my church. And I sometimes think that God gets leftovers and Super Bowls and other events in the culture. We're there early. The other thing that I just say, even to Christians listening, I get that everybody's late every now and then. But the chronic late person to church, are you chronically late to work? Are you chronically late getting your kids to school? And then what is it like for the people that are in the middle of worship, and then people come in late and then they tap the person whose arms are in the air worshiping God on the shoulder so that they can get by? And I just think sometimes that's a sloppy way of doing life for God.
For sure. Vanjie, thank you for sending in your question. We could talk about this like the whole program, but there's also, I've experienced a couple times sitting in church, and somebody near me has a really good voice, and they're singing extra loud, and it's almost like, are you showing off, or am I just jealous? So, I guess that's just me, where I have to stop it, Brian. Don't be thinking like that. But
yeah, yep, it's all true. All of these experiences
yes, they are.
Are real experiences that we have in church.
Only the names have been changed.
And then Bobby used the word sloppy, and it made me think of the Sloppy Wet Kiss song, and then...
Oh, my word. How did that how did that make it its way in to worship publishing? I mean...
I think it was just supposed to be a song on the album, and somebody heard it and said, we got to start singing this, and they did without realizing that line, and then somebody decided to change it at some point. But yeah, it's kind of, yeah.
I love that song, but then it all just goes, if grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. I mean, that's a great phrase, but a sloppy wet kiss, I'm out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta agree. You weren't looking to experience a sloppy wet kiss.
No, I try to give my wife one, and she always slaps me. She doesn't want one either.
Yeah. We ought to just wrap the radio show up for the day.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
On that note,
yes.
Good night, everybody.
Yes. Brian and Bobby are definitely in trouble when they get home tonight. But 888-564-6173 is the number to call. Let's do one more from Facebook here. CJ wants to know, as he listens in Arizona, 2 questions about David. Did God give David multiple wives? So I think what CJ is asking is, did God allow this, perhaps, is what he means. I don't know. Second question from CJ is, what did David mean when he told Jonathan that he loved him just as much as any woman? Tony, what would you say to CJ?
Yeah, this question comes up, a lot as far as the multiple wives, and people have used it to justify the plurality of wives today, which is not the case. God gave one man and one woman, and even Jesus confirmed this in Matthew chapter 19. He confirmed that what was designed in the beginning, one man, one woman. So it was very culturally relevant to have multiple wives. And so they did what was culturally relevant, but it doesn't mean it was right in the eyes of God. And so we know that they got in a lot of trouble. David did. And then, of course, Solomon took it to an extreme that is just nuts, with 1,000 women, 700 wives, 300 concubines. And so, the Bible says, hey, do not multiply wives or they will turn your heart away from me. God told them that, but they still did it anyway. No different. God tells us things in the word and we still do it anyway. So that's all because something is culturally acceptable doesn't mean it's acceptable in the eyes of God. And so the second question, dealing with David, if you look at the Hebrew word for love, it is used in a variety of other verses in the Old Testament that refer to a friendship, not a love as in romantic love. Now, it can be used that way, but all the other ways it's that Hebrew word for love is used is always in a friendship type of way. So we would just say that he had a great friendship with David. And then some even suggested that he was comparing that, the love of a woman, he was comparing that to Saul's daughters. Of how, Michal and the other daughter, Merab, I believe, and how he was supposed to have Merab, but then all of a sudden, she was given to another man. And then Michal, we know how she was. She was just rotten. And there's reasons for her bitterness, but that some scholars suggest that he was even referring to that Jonathan was way better than those girls that I had, so to speak. So, but definitely the word refers to friendship.
Now, Bobby, what does this passage not mean? Because some people have tried to take it out of context to mean something that it doesn't mean.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not teaching that David was homosexual and that they were homosexual lovers. That is just an absolute, Jesus, reading into the text for sure. You can't, find that in ancient writings whatsoever. That's just kind of a hypersexualized Western culture trying to use the Bible to advance its agenda and then imposing an interpretation on it 2,000 years later. Really, not even 3,000 years later, 3,500 years later. I mean, it is just way out of touch. And that is problematic. I would say that even behind those interpretations, I find that even non-believers can look at what the Bible has to say as it relates to sexuality, and they will bring it up like, boy, the Bible's constraining it. It condemns homosexuality. It condemns, sexual immorality, just heterosexually speaking as well. Yeah. They recognize that. But the people that are trying to hold on to Jesus, but give the Bible kind of a new take, it's those that struggle with those feelings. And I can understand how hard that would be, but I don't think whenever we struggle with something, we should go back to the Bible and find stories to fit our narrative feelings, our feeling narrative. Then as it relates to polygamy, I do think, okay, so even on homosexuality, for example, on polygamy, we can validate things. Like we can say, hey, I understand that this would be difficult to struggle with this, right? But we all do have struggles in life, and we can talk about what that looks like. I do think sometimes we look at, one set of struggles as, worse than another set. And sometimes one set of struggles is worse than another set. But at the end of the day, we all can turn whatever we struggle with over to the Lord. But for polygamy, I do think we can say, yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem like God's, judging it a whole lot in the Old Testament. I can see how, it might look like God's turning his eye here. There's times where I read it and I'm going, man, I wish there was a little bit more direct language there. But what does Jesus do in Matthew 19? Well, when it comes to marriage, he goes back to the Genesis account, qualifies it as between a man and a woman. And so we see that there. Nowhere in the New Testament do we see polygamy being permitted. And then I just think it falls under progressive revelation. We have to understand that when God is revealing himself, the people of those various communities and cultures, they had already inherited a set of living values that were highly ingrained in their culture. And so it's as if God doesn't ultra shock the system at once. He kind of gradually takes Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldeans. He teaches him some things. He gives him some revelation of who he is. Then he takes Moses, and then there's the law, and more stuff comes there. And over time, God reveals more, but he doesn't shock the system all at once. It's not like they all had the entire canon of Scripture, so it's easier for us to sit in judgment with 66 books, but we need to remember that they didn't have all of that data. They were getting pieces of who God is in revelations that were coming far and few between.
Pastor Brian.
Yeah, that's all great. One last thing, just to answer very specifically the way the question was worded about David and Jonathan. David did not say this to Jonathan. So that's the way the question was worded, that True. David said this to Jonathan. David said this about Jonathan after Jonathan had died. And so that's I just thought that was a needed clarification. It's not like there was some conversation where David said to Jonathan, I love you more, or your love to me is greater than the love of women. So,
Right. Okay, very good. CJ, thank you for sending in your question on the Pastor's Perspective Facebook page. And now we're going to go to the phones at 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173. Kathy in Newport, welcome to the program.
Hi, men of God. I really appreciate you guys are here to help me. Could you help me understand what the word holy is and as it pertains to holy God? I understand what holy Bible means, or someone is holy. It means to set apart for God. But when the Bible calls God holy, would you please help me understand what it means when we say God is holy?
Okay, Bobby Conway, let's start with you on this one.
Well, on one side, God is holy in that God is set apart. God is set apart from us in that he is transcendent, yet he is eminently engaged with us as well. But what does he do? He calls us to be like him. God is set apart. He calls us to be set apart. But typically when we're learning about be holy as I am holy, what does that mean to be set apart? Well, God is morally perfect. He is without, blemish. And so God is perfect in his moral righteousness. He's never known a moral failure. The moral law even flows from him. The moral law doesn't exist independent of God, like on Platonism, right? Or like the old Euthyphro dilemma, is something good because God wills it, or does God will it because it is good? If something is good because God wills it, then the good is arbitrary, kind of like Allah. God can will whatever he wants. But if it's the other, then goodness exists independent of God, and God would need to conform to that moral standard. So there's no moral standard that exists independent from God. God is the holy standard, and from his own virtuous, holy, good nature, he issues moral commands to us that in turn become our obligations. And when we fail to make good on that, then we become morally accountable to him, and he's the righteous judge in order to hold us accountable. But in his grace, he sends Jesus to fulfill the law that all of us would break, because Jesus was also, God in the flesh. He was perfect, and he modeled that for us.
Pastor Brian?
Well, I just want to say that was a fantastic explanation, Bobby. Very, very good.
Bobby gets a gold star.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You like the Euthyphro dilemma, huh?
Yeah, I haven't heard it for a while, and but of course I have heard it, and I just think you articulated it very articulately.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it was good, really good. I think just the passage in, I think 1 John 1:5 is always a great passage when you want to talk about this topic. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. So the idea of holy is that God is pure. He's absolutely pure, morally speaking. He's right. He's good. There's nothing dark or vile or perverse or sinful or wicked in God. Nothing at all. He's completely, so like Bobby said, the separate thing, yes, he's transcendent, that's separate from us, but he's also separate in the sense that he is absolutely pure.
Pastor Tony.
Yeah, Isaiah 57, 15, I believe it says, so says the high and lofty one who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. And just like the great doctor said that, God is set apart from us. And, but at the same time, he is engaged in us. And so we look at also the New Testament, the word hagios, the Greek word for hagios means that is translated holy. It means that we are set apart for God to use us. And in order for God to use us, we have to, as the great doctor said, be ye holy, for he is holy. And so God is without spot. It doesn't mean that we can be absolutely perfect like God is. But he says, in Matthew 5, as well as 1 Peter 1, for us to be holy, for he is holy. So there's a level of holiness that can be attained here on the earth, because he would not have told us to be holy if it was impossible.
Bobby Conway.
So this is a topic that I think is healthy for us to talk about when it comes to the idea of goodness and righteousness and holiness and virtue, for that matter. Take, for example, if God doesn't exist, then what does it mean that something is objectively right or wrong? In other words, we are conforming to the image of Christ. And so in conforming to the image of Christ, we're conforming to a holy person. We're conforming to his character. Remove the character, remove the person, and then you're left with a bunch of persons, right, that maybe emerged through the process of natural selection on atheism. So you end up getting in a pickle if you don't believe in God, and then you say you believe in objective morality. And by objective, I mean that something is objectively right or wrong, independent of what you as a subject think of it. So if somebody says that, it is okay for somebody just to randomly walk up to a pregnant mom and, murder her. If somebody says that, there's nothing wrong with that. Well, independent of that person's opinion, that he thinks it's okay, it is still objectively wrong to do that. So God has put this moral law on our heart, which is a reflection of his holy nature, of his holy character. And so we are saying as Christians that we believe, independent of us as individual subjects, there exists a universal moral law that is grounded in a universal moral law giver, who then has placed this moral law in our hearts. And we are obligated to conform to God's moral standard. And when we don't, we transgress, and then we're in need of redemption. And so that's what the Bible has us saying. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. So I think that you get people that recognize the problem. If I say that God doesn't exist, then how can I say that there is such a thing as objective morality? But they don't want to go so far as to say that, well, you can just randomly walk up to people and kill them. So what they end up doing is they end up trying to ground morality in the Platonic realm and say that there are these personless, abstract moral objects like fairness or kindness. And that's problematic, because how could we ever be obligated to some random object?
Kathy, thank you for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective. And now it's your turn to ask a question. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with more of your questions. 888-564-6173. We're here till 4 p.m. Pacific time on this Tuesday, the 19th of March. 888-564-6173. Pastors Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, and Tony Clark at 888-564-6173. We're back on Pastor's Perspective, 888-564-6173. Brian Perez here. We're also live streaming on Facebook and YouTube, so thank you so much for watching. Thank you for sharing the video on your page so that we can get more people watching and engaged and calling in with their questions at 888-564-6173. We've got Brian Broderson, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. He's here in the studio with me. Pastor Tony Clark from Calvary Chapel, Newport News in Virginia is on the Tony TV. And Bobby Conway, the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, he's on the Bobby Cam. And you are on the phone at 888-564-6173. Let's go to Gabriel, who's watching us on the aforementioned YouTube in Riverside. Hi there, Gabriel. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective.
Yes, thanks, Pastor. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Ooh, hold on. You must be on a speakerphone or something, because you do not sound all that great. You sound far away or something. It's not you, it's your phone. You sound great. It's your phone that doesn't. So let me go back to you. Hopefully you're not on the speakerphone anymore. What is your question? Go right ahead.
Yes, sir. I have a question. Is how requirement, or is it required to go to church to praise God as much as possible? Because I have relatives that did me to church, and they asked me what church am I going to, because I had mentioned that I'm reading the Bible every day. I give myself to the Lord, and he said, "Oh, I have to go to church." And I had mentioned them on YouTube and all this stuff like that. But I was listening to a sermon from Mac McMillan, and he told me, "You are church. You cannot go to a place that what you are." It's a certain word. I guess it's an organism or something like that. He was mentioning that you are church. You cannot ignore that what you are. You guys answer that for me?
So you're not attending any church right now. You're just watching online on Sunday mornings or whatever. Do you have a job on Sunday mornings? Is that why you're not going to church?
No, I got prior commitments, and I'm not saying nothing's more important to God, but I do have multiple children and multiple activities. But I try to get to service as much as I can. But I'm also reading the Bible daily. You know, the Bible went from 0% of my life to 90% of my life daily. You know.
Okay. Brian, what would you say to Gabriel?
That's great, Gabriel. That's good news to hear that. The Bible has become so much a part of your life. But church is, so the idea that you are the church, singular, that's really not, that's not a biblical idea. You are a part of the church. The Bible uses different imagery to talk about what the church is like. And one of the things the Bible uses is the body. So the body has many parts, but it's one body. So you're part of the body. So just think about that analogy. If you're part of the body, but you're disconnected from the rest of the body, then that's obviously problematic. But it's also, the church is also a family. It's the household of God. So you have entered into a family. And a family isn't just one person. A family is multiple people. And the thing is, we need the scriptures, obviously, to grow. God's word nourishes and feeds us, but that's not all we need. We also need other Christians. We need people around us. We need their influence. We need their prayers. We need their encouragement. We need their exhortation. And so it's for maturity in Christ, it is essential that we connect with the people of God. Plus, in that larger context of a church, you have God has given gifted people, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, and their ministry is to help you grow so you can make your contribution to the greater work of God's kingdom. So, especially when we have tons and tons of great options for churches, there really isn't any excuse for us not to be plugged into a church. And a specific church is really the best idea too, rather than, some people church hop. They go to this place because they like this. And then next week they go to another place because they like the way they do that over there. But that's more just, sort of, it's what you call consumerism. You're just seeking to consume aspects of the church on your own desire, your own likes and preferences and things like that. But what you want to do is you want to become part of a community that lives together, grows together, loves together, serves together, suffers together. All of those things are what the church is all about. So all Christians are either engaged, active members of the church, or they're disengaged and inactive members of the church. But we're all members of the church by nature of what the church is.
Did you guys see the article that I sent you last week? At least I think I did. That there's some church that's saying we're not going to do online streaming at all anymore. It's not just...
I know that church.
Oh, do you? Okay. Yeah, that was just interesting because it's not a COVID thing. They weren't saying COVID's over. I mean, they were saying that, but they've been live streaming even before COVID.
Yep.
But they just recently said, no, we need people here. With us.
Exactly.
Yeah. Tony Clark?
Yeah, that I read that article as well. And so it's becoming frustrating for a lot of pastors, and I'm not saying this church is doing that, because if you take your service offline, they'll just go watch somebody else's.
Yeah.
And so it's not like and I'm not saying that they were punishing folks from being online when they should be in the church. No, they were not doing that at all. They said this is what works for them. And there was a church expert that said, you pray about that. This is working for them and they're okay with it. It may be a good thing for you to be online. So I just thought it was a good thing. But, church is so important. Someone has jokingly put it, watching service online is like watching a fireplace on TV. You can see the flames, but you can't feel it. And I've had people come through the doors talking about, this is my first time back since COVID. And they said, oh, it's so different than being online, than being in service, than, being in person. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of people today, we are the church, and, church is not a building and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just kind of over those kind of arguments and those kinds of things. We have to be in church. Don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. And then the next phrase, as the matter of some, but exhort and encourage one another so much more as you see the day of the Lord approaching. So as we see the signs of the times of Jesus approaching, or Jesus coming, the writer of Hebrews said, how much more should we be gathering together to, like Pastor Brian said, to encourage, to serve? I mean, when you're on your couch, who are you serving? What ministry are you serving in? Couch ministry? You can give online. Okay, that's great. But, we learn in roles, but we grow in groups. But we need to be together in order for this to happen. We need each other. Some people are a thumb, some people are a heart, some people are a spleen. But just like Pastor Brian said, 1 Corinthians 12 says that we are the body of Christ. And sure, today people can do without a kidney and do without this, that, but it's nothing like when the body is functioning together. And we have to be together in order to function together.
Dr. Bobby Conway.
So I've been trying to, take some time from time to time to equip the church on what it means to come to church. It's true that the church is an organism, but the organism needs to be organized. And so we learn about orderly worship in 1 Corinthians, and we are to gather together. There is a sense where people through COVID felt like, I'm just really growing in the Lord, but it's just me and my Bible, and it's a very self-serving thing. Like, I don't think that the Lord created us to have a bunch of Bible information in our head so that we think properly about him alone, but rather it was to make a difference in the lives of others. And so he saves us to help us to be a part of building up the church. So I think COVID happens, and a lot of people are like, well, my life's not looking much different, and I was going to church, and considering that I'm not going to church. And so I think some people felt like, well, what difference is church really making? And I'd say it's also possible to go to church and experience no change as well. So how do we go to church to get out of it what God would want us to get from it? Well, I think that we have to approach church from a standpoint that, we're going that day to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And so even if we're not actively serving in a ministry that day, I've been saying things like, what would it look like for you to come to church and, you show up early and you're on your way to church and you're praying something like, Lord, help me to be aware of, if anybody needs encouragement, if somebody needs to be prayed for, if somebody needs me to roll up my sleeves and help out somewhere, what would it look like for me to just be aware of the needs that are going on? How could my gestures communicate hope to people? What if somebody needs a smile? Help me to smile. Help me to show up and keep an eye out for guests that are just sitting there and go up and make people feel comfortable. Help me to be attuned to, listening to stories. So if I hear one person sharing something and I'm aware of somebody else, that would be a good person to connect that person with. And let me go introduce this person to this person. And so I think when people go to church and they're like, I'm just going in, and you walk away, how was the worship? Did I like the word? And then we're just kind of critics over that experience. We're missing so much of what it's about. We're to show up. And imagine those of you that are moms and dads teaching your kids, how to approach church. Like, go in there and encourage the other kids. Listen well. Pat someone on the back if they seem like they're hurting. Let somebody know that you'll be praying for them. Like, be a life giver. I think that's what church is about. We show up, and we're life-giving, and we might not have served that day in a particular ministry, but God can use us every single Sunday. And if we just view church as this checklist that I went and I heard the word and leave, well, we can remain unchanged forever because we have to give our lives away.
Interesting that you say that, Bobby, about kids' church. I just wanted to bring that up again, that so often we think that serving in the church is just for the big people, the adults. But yeah, we can train our kids when we drop them off at Sunday school. Hey, if you see somebody who's doesn't look like they're having a good day, just be there for them, encourage them. Like you said, pat them on the back. Tony?
No,
and talk about church after church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, talk about church. Like moms and dads, like, talk about church. Like, ask your kids what they got. Keep the conversation going on. See, the thing that I worry about so much is the culture has taken so much of our time, and we just went with it. Yeah. And so now the church, I mean, there was a time people go to church. When Heather and I were dating, we were going to church 4 and 5 nights a week. I mean, we couldn't get enough of it. We wanted to be in community. We wanted to worship. We wanted to connect with other Christians. Then it got to a point where it was like, okay, people would go to church, a couple days a week. Then, small groups were really thriving in the 90s and the early 2000s. Yeah. And then people started going, I don't really need small groups anymore. And then people didn't need a midweek. People didn't need a Sunday night. They got a Sunday morning, but they don't really want to think a whole lot. And they would, by the way, they'd like the message down to about 30 minutes. And so how in the world are we ever supposed to be equipped? And now we live in a world where people just go online and they think that that's what church is. I just go and I get a bunch of information and me and Jesus are good. And I go, man, we have got to really rethink what this means to be Christians and be a part of the church.
Pastor Brian?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Absolutely. I think all of it's good. I hope, I hope it's landing on some open ears for people who need to hear that. And, it is time to really engage. And I think as time goes on and as the culture gets crazier, I don't have a whole lot of hope that it's going to get less crazy. Apart from some great move of God, but a great move of God is going to take the people of God to get engaged. So,
that's exactly right.
We're gonna have to do something, and I think both what Tony and Bobby shared were great words of exhortation, which are needed.
Yeah, Pastor Tony.
Yeah,
no, I'm looking at all the calls that's left, so I'm good.
Oh, okay.
One
Bobby.
statement. Yeah, one statement. It's this. I get discouraged because it's like, even with the kids' sports. I mean, I got one family like, we'll see in about 3 months. And I'm like, that's what I mean by this.
Yeah.
They'll just take 3 months off. And I'm like, we just give the culture whatever. And now you know what? If all the Christians would have been like, no, you're not going to take our Sundays. We're going to do this. If we would not let that happen so easily, we wouldn't have this problem. But when the culture wants to take our 11 o'clock time slot on Sunday, well, Satan loves that, right? In the name, because get your kids out of church 3 and 6 months a year and then model for them that it's not a real value to be a part of it and that sports are more important. Well, guess what? And now here's even the bigger thing. Let Satan convince you that that's a legalistic statement too. On top of that, boy, they're really legalistic. Well, I mean, this is what we're up against.
And, there are those, even, I'm thinking of somebody that I won't mention their name, but, there are guys who say are maybe more in the kind of the parachurch world now, meaning they're not exactly connected to a local church or ministering through that. They're kind of a little more independent. And they've kind of decided like, hey, I don't even know that Sundays are that important anymore. That's a tradition, maybe you don't need that. And so they're writing books and they're doing podcasts and they're telling everybody, hey, don't worry about going to church. Just make sure you get together with a group of people and you stay connected that way. And you're like, we don't, this is not the message that people need to hear right now. But, 100%. All of this, as you both know, as all three of you know, these are symptoms of a bigger problem, and it's the problem of just, sin, not deep, gross, sin necessarily, but just the kind of sin that hardens your heart just enough to where you almost don't even know it's hard. And the things of the Spirit are no longer really like a priority. It's sort of take it or leave it. Where at one time in your life, it was life or death, man. I need to be in the Word. I need to be in fellowship. I need to be around God's people. But here's the thing I think, especially Christians need to remember this. There are people that are dying that are going to come to faith in Jesus, and they want everything that you used to want. They want to hear the Bible. They don't mind sitting for more than 30 minutes. As a matter of fact, 30 minutes is like, what are you doing? We're just getting started here. They want to be prayed for. They want to be away from the sin that was wrecking their lives. They want to be in a place where they sense the presence of God among the people of God. So if the church is like, well, we're kind of bored with this, I don't know anymore. What are we even offering to people who are coming into faith in Jesus? What are they going to come into?
So true.
So Lord, help us.
Yep. Tony?
Yeah.
Lord.
Yeah, and Pastor Brian will remember this, back in the 80s, what he's describing is how we saw Christianity back then. We couldn't get enough of it. And yes, it was, I will say the tail end of the Jesus movement revival kind of thing. But we still wanted the Lord. When I came to Christ 40 years ago, what Pastor Brian described as what we wanted. We couldn't get enough church. We couldn't get enough. And so now, just like the movie Concussion said, the NFL has taken a day that used to belong to the church. And so people today, I tell our church all the time, let's say it's 1 in a million that your kid will make it to the NFL or make it in the professional sports of their choosing. I said, but if they get there and don't know God, what did you do? Because you taught them that sports is more important than church. Sports is more important than youth group. Sports is more important. And then if they get there and they don't know God, I said, what did you do to them? Because you showed them sports. That church takes a back seat to sports and recitals and cheerleading and AAU. AAU is just ruining things because AAU is a lot of money and a lot of traveling, and parents think, or they are trying to live through their kids, and it's just, and yes, kids need sports. They need to be running around, run off, some soccer and run off some of that steam. Yes, but never let it take precedence over God and church.
Really quick, I want to go back to Gabriel just to make sure that he doesn't feel like we're beating up on him or anything like that. Gabriel, do you still love us?
Yeah, yes, and I'm taking everything in as it's coming, and I want to say thank you guys for everything you guys do for us, and it's truly a blessing what you guys do for me.
Thanks, Gabriel.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for calling us today here.
Thanks for asking that question.
Yeah.
I mean, it gave us a good opportunity to
absolutely
speak to a lot more than just back to Gabriel.
Yep. Very good. Where did Lee go? Oh, Lee had a good question, but Lee hung up. Okay. So let's go to Will in Paramount, California. What did you want to ask us, Will?
Well, my question, hi, guys.
Hi.
Great show. Great everything. What you guys do is awesome. It's just a question that boggling my mind is how ancient civilizations like the Egyptians and the Mayans, right? And they talked about every story of them is about ascension or descension, right? Something ascended, something descended, right? And the great knowledge that these civilizations had was tremendous, right? And obviously there's some scholars, right, that say, hey, they were visited by some type of form from the heavens and the skies, right? And so my question is not that aliens really visited, right? But could it be that maybe God himself in a form, in a way that maybe revealed to them differently than he reveals to us, although it's not in the Bible, right? But, for example, I'm from Guatemala, there's a Mayan ruin in Tikal that has an ancient Mayan in a spaceship, pretty much, right, where his foot is on a pedal and there's a thrust giving out, and then he's looking up to the sky, right? And so they say that that's something that they saw, so they put it on their pyramid, on their wall. So, and the Mayans, right? There was a lot of knowledge in there in that civilization. So could it be that God himself, as being omnipotent, or omniscient, right? Or he is here today, he could be in the past, in the future, and stuff. Could it be that maybe God himself revealed to this ancient civilization?
Okay, Bobby Conway, what would you say to Will?
I mean, I do think that God reveals himself in nature, in creation. The heavens declare the glory of God. Psalm 19, Romans chapter 1, God's moral laws written on our heart. I don't think that God would be involved in any form of trickery where he would manifest himself in a way that could confirm people in Mayanism or in another alternative belief. So I think if God is going to make himself known, he's going to make himself known. It's not going to be a manifestation that's going to make somebody further deceived in thinking that maybe their local tribal belief is right. So I do think that when God makes himself known, when God reveals himself, it's to distinguish himself from other gods. So that's what God's always about, because God is holy, he's set apart.
Tony Clark, got about a minute.
Yeah, it is believed that the Anunnaki came down and gave the knowledge of the pyramids and all that kind of stuff, and modern technology and those type of things. Some, that's in a similar camp that I'm in, see a connection with Genesis chapter 6 and the Nephilim. Came down and gave advanced knowledge to the people of that particular day. And that's how the pyramids got built, and and all kind of other stories that come as a result of that. So it wasn't God came down himself. It is believed that, fallen angels or demonic beings came down and gave advanced knowledge to humans. And that's why we have pyramids almost, I think, on every continent. I believe we have a pyramid, and that sort of knowledge came down from spiritual beings, and it wasn't God himself.
Will, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective, and we will have to leave you guys now because we're out of time. But we'll be back tomorrow between 3 and 4 p.m. Pacific time. If we didn't get to your call today, really, really sorry. Please try again tomorrow. We will be here between 3 and 4. Phone lines open about 7 minutes before 3 o'clock. So Bobby Conway, great to have you on. Tony Clark as well. Pastor Brian Broderson, I think you'll be on tomorrow. You and Bobby?
Me and Bobby and Ed Stetzer. We'll have two doctors on tomorrow.
Wonderful.
Wow. So it'll be doctor. Man, that'll be interesting.
Yes, that's going to be fun.
Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.